My name is Ade Sofola. I am from 4 in 10, which is an organisation that works to raise awareness of child poverty in London. So we were set up a while ago. The time we were set up, there were 4 in 10 of London's children were living in poverty as defined by the government. So they were living under the poverty line that the government had set. And it was a real, it was an issue for a city that was this wealthy to have that many children who were living in poverty. At present, 597,000 children in London live in poverty. And to put some context into that, because it's quite a big number, that's more than the numbers of children that live in poverty in Scotland and Wales combined in this city. So it is a big issue for London, and we think there's a lot that we need to do to kind of try and tackle that.
Can you tell me why you think that is, that London's so much in poverty?
So London has a very interesting setup. It is a big city. It is a big city where there are quite a lot of low-paid people. Roughly about 2 million people out of London's 8 million would be classified as working in a low-paid job. So if you put that in context and you then have higher than average housing costs, higher than average transport costs, higher than average childcare costs, you kind of put families in a real bind. They're not earning enough. They can't really live anywhere. They can't get anywhere. And they can't put their children in childcare. You kind of create this perfect kind of symmetry where child poverty becomes a real issue. So for policymakers and for local authorities, they really need to think creatively about what they can do to tackle low pay, what they can do to tackle childcare costs, transport costs and housing costs, to try and help families so that they're not in a situation where they can't afford to feed themselves, they can't afford to pay their fuel costs, or they can't afford to send their children to school. These who are feeling the real brunt of the cuts that the government has made. And local authorities have had a lot of their budgets cut at the same time. So where they would have been able to intervene to support families previously, there isn't money there to be that flexible. And what we find now is that there is a lot more need from families. So families who had traditionally been okay are really struggling. Families who are always struggling are struggling even more. There is less service provision, both from the local authority, but also from the voluntary sector, because there's been cuts. And we sort of don't really know what to do. There's been a lot of money thrown in at the extreme end, so families who are really in severe problems. But there's a lot of families in London who are living in overcrowded housing, who are living in poor quality housing, who are commuting for hours really to get their children to school, who aren't eating enough, whose children are turning up at hospitals malnourished or obese because they're eating inappropriately. There's a lot of that happening, and there isn't really, I would say, a joint up system to tackle that. There's lots of small interventions, but there isn't the money there to really help them in the way that they should be helped.
Okay, and what are the children actually going without?
So they're going without a range of things. So, for example, there's been research in London looking at children turning up at school hungry. So teachers are increasingly chipping in for their breakfast, chipping in for their lunch, and giving them a little bit of money to sort of get something to eat. We've spoken to teachers who said they've noticed in terms of cycles that sometimes children turn up on Thursdays and Fridays really hungry because their parents clearly don't get paid until Monday. So food has run out. And so those children can't concentrate. And we've really pushed hard to try and think about what could we do to kind of help that. But also a really interesting case study that we did was around kind of absences at school. And we spoke to one particular family whose child had not turned up in school, and they were trying to unpick what had actually happened. He was a fairly high-achieving child. Parent was quite well engaged, so it was really odd that he just didn't turn up. What had happened eventually, after a lot of probing and some really gentle work, was that he had ripped his school trousers. His mum didn't have the £5 to get him another pair of trousers. So instead of sending him to school, knowing that he'd be sent back home without wearing his uniform, she kept him at home until she could get together £5 and then buy him a pair of trousers to go back to school. So it's those kind of cases that actually, when you think about the impact on his education and what that could mean for his life chances to get out of poverty, that's massive. When you think about children who are turning up hungry to class and their ability to concentrate and to focus and to really achieve, That's massive. You're talking about parents who are often going without food so that their children can eat, parents who are making choices to buy their children cheaper, let's say, sausages from some frozen supermarket as opposed to fresh fruit and veg because they know they'll get more calories for their £1 or their £2. That is a lifelong bill that the NHS will have to pick up. And so when we talk about child poverty, it's not just this is something that we should do on a moral sense. It is something that as a society we should think about. But there's a hard cost for not intervening in child poverty. And we will pay that cost either now by intervening or later when we have to pick up the pieces.
And what current campaigns are you actually running at the moment to try and tackle the problem?
So one of our biggest campaigns at the moment is around free school meals. We've really seen an increase of hunger in London. The General London Assembly did an investigation into hunger in London, and they found that actually children are very hungry in London. There are a majority of children who are turning up hungry and teachers saying the same. And so we've been working with the London Food Board and other organisations to try and see if London could imaginatively try and offer every child in primary school a hot meal. That is a guarantee of calories, irrespective of where you come from. And it also changes the dynamic in schools because children will sit together equally, eat together and focus together. And we think that that will make a massive difference. We know that there have been some interventions around breakfast clubs, for example, in more deprived areas to help children just so that they can get over that first hump in the day. But the day is quite long, and we just think that lunches are just a really huge part of the day, and we should try and do that alongside with providing children books to study and pens. We should really provide them food so that they can really focus and get the most out of education.
What can people actually do to help?
I think there's a lot. First thing is to kind of get information on your local area, get information on child poverty itself, get information about what is happening. There's lots of information on the 4 and 10's website. There's lots of research agencies that do a lot of work. Get that first. The second thing is really challenge your local politicians to ask them what they're doing about child poverty. The Child Poverty Act stipulates that every local authority should have a child poverty strategy. Does your local authority have one? If they don't, why not? If they haven't got one, when are they going to put it together? Because without a strategy, there is no plan. And therefore, we will just swim along in this tide of just ever increasing child poverty. The third thing for me is then about thinking what campaigns are you particularly interested in that you can support. There are campaigns around overcrowding. There are campaigns about housing quality, about rental increases. There are campaigns about free school meals that we are doing. So really think about what area you really interested in. I think the mix is about kind of political action and sort of holding politicians to account, but also individual concern and what you can do to intervene.